Today, I'm joined by Grace Gill. Grace was a two-time A-League champion with Canberra United. She represented the Matildas and is now a respected football commentator and analyst who will be one of the commentators for the upcoming World Cup. Thanks for your time today, Grace.
Pleasure to be here, Abby. Thanks so much for having me.
So we'll obviously talk more about the World Cup soon, but just first of all, as we're chatting now, there's exactly 3 weeks to go, which I think we said before. Where are your excitement levels at right now?
It is just creeping up on us. And I remember starting a countdown timer when it was like 150 days to go. And now that we're almost into single digits, it is just like literally just around the corner. And in a couple more weeks' time, that'll be down into single digits. And then that first game will be upon us before we know it.
This year has gone by so fast, it's crazy. There may be a lot of kids like me or even adults who never saw you play when you were younger. How would you describe your football career and the type of player that you were?
Oh, that's a great question. It was a while ago. So I played mostly between the years of around about 2006 to 2018, and that's when I spent most of my time with Canberra United. So with United, I was a central defensive midfielder. So just good sort of scanner, good delivery. I was never like the fastest player on the team or the most explosive, but I could sort of run all day. And I really loved putting through balls through for, players in the likes of, Michelle Heyman and Ash Sykes, they're girls that I played with. So that was what I really enjoyed doing when I played.
And you were there when the Women's A-League, or the W League as it was called back then, first started. What are your memories of how everyone was feeling when the new national women's competition was starting?
It was pretty cool. It was one of those things that we didn't know exactly what it would be and how it would turn out. And we didn't have any idea that it would last for, now coming into its 16th year this season of now what is the A-League Women's. But at the time, we were just sort of excited that we had a national competition back on the stage. And we had some of the best players, the best players in Canberra at the time with Canberra United. And a lot of those girls were either current Matildas or former Matildas. And in the early days of Canberra United, we had some really successful years. So my memories of that time are really, really fond. And to be now, 15, 16 years down the line is a pretty cool thing to think back on.
When you were a kid playing football, was that ever something you thought about, like possibly being able to play nationally?
It wasn't really, to be honest. I genuinely just played for fun because my friends at school did. And when I started playing on the team with a few friends who I'm still friends with today, which is like one of the coolest parts about football, is that you just make these lifelong friends and lifelong relationships. And I didn't think of it at the time, but as I sort of progressed in my career and then sort of went up the ACT or Canberra ranks, and then the W League was formed, that was a genuine aspiration that I had to play. So to then go on and play for 8 years with Canberra United was pretty special.
Well, it's pretty awesome, I guess, where you've gone now. Another pretty cool thing that I found out is that you are Matilda 158. You played 1 game for the Matildas in 2008, and I was looking at some of the other girls in that team that day. Claire Polkinghorne, Tamika Yallop, and Kaya Simon. They must have all been like babies back then.
They were, and I was, a little bit older than them. Polks and I are the same age. We're born in the same year. Obviously, they went on to do some pretty incredible stuff and are still doing some pretty incredible stuff. But I think that's why, for me, this World Cup is so special, because to see players who were either my teammates or former opposition, and now they're playing at some of the best teams in the world and for the Matildas and on a home World Cup, is really, really special. So, there's a sense of pride around that, but just seeing, I guess your colleagues and your teammates go on to do such spectacular things is just great to sit back and watch.
And there was someone else in that team as well. In fact, you replaced her at halftime when you came on, Elise Perry, and she would have been a teenager back then as well. And she also played with you at Canberra. What kind of an athlete and a person was she back then, just as a teenager?
I mean, she's unreal. She's as good as she is today in terms of her athleticism. She's such a great cricketer, and she was a wonderful footballer as well. She was one of those athletes that people would look at and just be like, how are you so good at everything? And she continued that into her cricket career and still to this day does exactly that. But she was always really smart. She was always really measured in sort of her footballing style. And she was versatile too. She could play on the wing, she could play defensively, and she went on to have a pretty good career in football as well.
And then there's someone that you played with at Canberra with their career was just starting, was Hayley Razzo, and she would have been super young then as well. What do you remember about young Hayley? And I have to know, was she still like wearing her famous ribbons back then?
I think she was. Hayley came down from Brisbane, and it's such a good question, Abby, because she came down from Brisbane because she struggled to get picked for the Brisbane Roar what back then was Queensland Roar. So she had to go further afield to try and find a team that would take her. And she came down to Canberra. She was a really young player. She had this raw talent about her. She was fast, she was fiery, similar things to what she is now, but exactly those traits that we know about Hayley, she was, 10, 15 years ago. So again, she's another one to see her go from her first back then W League appearance with Canberra United on to the Matildas, to Manchester City, and, wherever her future holds her. She's one that I'm particularly proud of.
And you've just said, that Hayley and some of the Matildas girls now, like Tamika Yallop and Claire Polkinghorne and Kaya Simon, they've all gone off to do pretty amazing things. How proud are you just of where they've gotten?
Well, I think just having that, connection with those girls who I grew up either playing with or against, and have just sat back in awe of them. They're such incredible athletes, and they've persevered in a time when it was really hard, because when they first started playing, they didn't have the support or the resources or the professionalism that the game has now. So now that they're playing in full-time sporting environments where they can be athletes is amazing. And yeah, I'm so happy for all of them.
And just going back to your career, I read that towards the end of it, you were kind of having a few injuries and you were determined to almost, end it while it was still in your control. How did you handle the transition from going to, training all the time, always playing sport, to just kind of the normal world?
Yeah, to be honest, it was pretty tough. And I was in a really, I'd say, fortunate position where I had a great support network around me. I had good family, I had good friends. I was working full time in an office job in Canberra the whole way throughout my Canberra United career. So when I stopped playing for Canberra United, I still had that job. And it's not like I then had to try and find my feet in the world. I just continued on in my sort of professional career outside of football. But even though I had that, it was still really tough to then settle back into normality and to find a routine that didn't revolve around training and recovery and games. So it is a really hard part of any athlete's career. But I was in a really fortunate position, but it's something that I think I'm quite passionate about in terms of supporting players into that part of their career, because it can be a really tricky period.
And I guess, like you just said, you think, it's kind of important to help, other athletes with that, because I guess just other athletes in all sports and spend so much of their time and their life just training and competing just all the time. And I can imagine it can just be, super hard when that just all suddenly comes to an end. Do you think enough is being done at the moment to help with that kind of transition?
I think we are finally starting to see more awareness about how important that time of an athlete's life is, because when you're the young athlete who is, a superstar 13 or 14-year-old, and people go, oh, that's the next big thing in this sport, you get everything thrown at you in the way of support and resources to help you succeed. And then when you're at the tail end of your career, whether it's through injury or age or non-selection, you don't have the same level of support and resources. So to answer your question, I'd say no, quite not enough is being done to fully support people into retirement or transitioning into that part of their life. But there's definitely a move that's been more recognised, which I think is really important.
I guess sometimes you see, athletes, having children, so they've had to take time off sport, but sometimes they don't always get the support they need. But it's good that it is slowly changing, I guess, and that, we're getting more support slowly for athletes that are, I guess, going through that transition period.
Definitely. And, Katrina Gorry, she's one who's not only gone through that period, but returned to such high level participation, and not just returned, but she's returned in, some of the best form of her life. So the fact that not only her club team and the Matildas have those support mechanisms in place now, I think, yeah, that's moving in the right direction.
And I guess just going back to your career, how did you find yourself becoming a football expert in the media?
Again, a good question. I was still playing at the time with Canberra United when I got my first opportunity to co-commentate a game in Canberra. And it was one of those things where I was thrown a little bit in the deep end with it and thought, oh, well, I'll give it a go. I'll see how we go. And I really enjoyed it. And then when my playing career slowed down and I stopped playing with Canberra United, I wanted to remain involved in the game, and I didn't want to go into coaching or that side of things, but I really enjoyed the media and broadcast side of things. So I started doing a little bit more commentary and picking up some of those skills. And then when there was some chances to work on a panel or a couch, I put my hand up for those too. So I've really enjoyed I guess the nervousness and the excitement you get ahead of going on air and talking about a game, in the same way that I used to really enjoy the nervousness and excitement before playing a game. And it's just sort of gone from there.
And you said you kind of, got into it, or you were asked to co-commentate, while you were kind of still playing. And I mentioned earlier that some of your teammates, they're still playing now. How do you deal with sometimes having to criticize your old teammates?
Yeah, that's really hard. And it's something that over time I've had to develop. I think when I first started commentating, I was really scared, I guess, to be critical of either a former teammate or even just other girls in the league who I knew and had respected and played against for my career. But I think in your role, whether it's in commentary or whether it's on the couch in, analysing a game, you're there to do a job and to talk about what is genuinely going on. So you don't want to sit on the side and cheerlead and paint a picture that isn't true. So you have to talk in a way that's accurate and respectful. But I think there's a really fine balance between how you criticize someone, because as a player and as an athlete, when you've made a mistake or when you've had a bad game, you're the harshest person on yourself. So you don't need people making you sort of feel worse about that. But as a media professional, you do need to find a nice, I guess, nuanced, balanced, respectful way to observe that a player hasn't had their best game. And there's different styles, and my style is different to the next person's as well. So there's no right or wrong way, but that's just my preferred way of going about it.
I think there might have been a recent incident in the A-League where an ex-player who was commentating, they made a criticism of one of the players, and they were kind of coming at them in the media, almost going, this isn't really helping the growth of our game. Was it kind of I guess, weird at first, just having to do all that? And were there many comments when you first started doing it?
When I first started, I wouldn't say there were too many comments because, like I said, I was probably pretty cautious with it. And as I've grown into years of learning and developing in this role, I think I've found ways in which I can be critical and provide constructive criticism or feedback on a player's performance or on a team's performance that doesn't necessarily attract too much heat from people or from players or from the media. But as I said, there's different styles to that. And some pundits, some experts, they just want to be really direct and flat, and that's fine, and I think that's really respected as well. But, for me personally, that's not exactly how I look to present myself.
And I guess, as an ex-player, you would know what it feels like to have commentary made about you and statements about you. Do you think it is really an advantage when you do it because you know what's actually helpful for the players?
I think so. And I think that's why I'm really mindful of it, because, I think when I watched the Matildas documentary on Disney Plus, there was a bit of my commentary that was used over one of the Matildas games where Sam Kerr missed an opportunity. And I remember I said, she's got to do better there. And that's true. That's a true statement. She had to do better there. But I remember when I was watching the documentary, it stood out to me, not only because it's weird, always weird hearing your own voice back, but because I knew more than anyone in that moment, Sam would have known that she had to do better there. So I think it's always really important to reflect and, go back and listen to your games and look at what you could have said in a way or a different way or a better way. And, I don't take back what I said, but I think it's a really good way to be mindful about how you can speak respectfully about a player who knows, and they will be their harshest judge on themselves anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, and so you were kind of an expert commentator and co-commentator, but then the past season you started being an actual, the main commentator of the games as well. What was it like kind of taking on that different role for the first time?
Scary. It was scary, and it gave me a whole new appreciation for the work that our lead commentators do, because I've sat in the role of co-commentary for several years now, but to sit in the seat and to be the person who's driving the show, who's calling the play-by-play, it's a completely different role. So you're not talking about the why of the game, you're talking about the what. You're talking about so-and-so passing to someone else. You're calling what is happening. And it was a completely different shift from what I've been so used to doing. And also has, changed the way I prepare for games as well. So my research, my preparation, my homework, but a very eye-opening experience, I'd say.
What's more nerve-wracking, do you think, walking out for a big game or having to get ready for commentate? Because you said you have a lot of notes.
Yeah. I think the feeling is actually really similar. And I've said this sort of in different ways before, where So when you're preparing as a player, you do all the training, you watch film of other teams, you look back on your own performances, and then you also look at the other teams and sort of think, you know, where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses, and then you go out on the park with the girls and you put in the work throughout the week. The preparation is kind of similar for commentary because you watch film of the teams, you put in the preparation, you go out and do your research and do your notes. And then when it comes to game day as a player, you get that nervous excitement. And I get the same feeling in commentary because I care about what I'm doing and I want to do a really good job. In the same way as a player, I cared about how I played and wanted to do a good job. And then at the end of the game or at the end of my commentating, you look back and you think, well, did I play well? Did I commentate well? What could have I done better? What could have I said better? So there's some really similar reflections to take from both positions. It's hard to say which is more nerve-wracking or which is harder, but they're sort of similar in a way.
I guess I haven't really thought about all the similarities that they would have, but yeah, I guess it's really obvious now. But and I think personally it's really important that we have more female voices commentating sport as well as the other parts, although like you said, it might be more nerve-wracking or harder, you know, to get the job. What's it like being part of, you know, this new era of women's commentators?
Yeah, it's something that I feel really proud about. And I think we're seeing a few more women overseas in those lead roles. So in the WSL and even in some of the Premier League games, there's lead female voices, which I think is so important. And I think what we'll see at this 2023 World Cup in particular is more women involved, whether that's in broadcast, on panels, hopefully in things like governance positions, administration positions. And that stuff is so important too, not just the players. The players are amazing in their own right, but actually having a full framework of women being involved in these key positions is really important. So for me to be involved as part of Channel 7's coverage for the Women's World Cup on home soil, look, yeah, I'm incredibly proud about it.
Do you think we'll see a time anywhere soon where, you know, females are commentating main A-League men's games?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I hope so. And I think in the last couple of years of the A-League men, obviously I've been involved, and you've got the likes of people like Amy Chapman, Georgia Yeomandale, and even this year in the A-League women's, we had lead female commentators like Pakua Frimpong and some really talented commentators, Taryn Hedo, Georgia Radjic. Like, those girls are doing such a good job too, and they've been given the platform and the opportunity to step into those positions. So I hope that that continues, and especially into the men's space, but it does still have a little way to go.
And just about your commentating again, you'll be one of the voices of the World Cup in Australia on Channel 7, and it'll probably be one of the biggest TV audiences we've ever had for women's football, you know? Like, it'll be huge for kids, men, women, and you're going to be, you know, in the middle of it, being on TV, commentating it all. What are you most excited about being one of the expert commentators?
Not to add to my nerves, Abby, but that's a really good question. I think that first game against the Republic of Ireland for the Matildas is going to be huge. I think we're going to see close to 80,000 people at the stadium. I think the roar of that stadium is going to be something that we haven't really experienced in Australia at a football game. And I think that moment for the players, but also for people like me, people like you in the media, I think it's actually going to be pretty emotional. And seeing the Matildas walk out, and I just know the stadium will lift at that point. I kind of get goosebumps just thinking about it. So I think that moment I'm really looking forward to, and obviously just really excited in general about the whole event.
Sorry if I made you a bit nervous with all of
this. No, sorry needed. It's good.
So exciting. And I've actually got a question now that came in from a Huawei follower, which is, what kind of assistance do the commentators get from all of the countries about making sure they pronounce the players' names correctly?
Yeah, good question. So we don't yet have the official pack of pronunciation guides, but that stuff does come through. And some teams are really good at preparing phonetically spelt names or a voice recording of names. And a few of the teams are starting to release that kind of information. But as well as that, I like to do pretty thorough research. And whether that's going and listening to games where the players who are playing names are pronounced, and me sort of understanding how to say names that may be difficult when I first read them, I like to try and do my best job at respecting correct pronunciation. Some obviously so much harder than others, but that's all part of the preparation too.
Is that one of like the harder parts about being the main commentator, because you've got to kind of say their names and like say their every moves, I guess?
Yeah, sort of player ID. So being able to watch the game and see a player and know their number and their name and have the correct pronunciation. So there's sort of a few key pieces of information that happen in a split second, really.
Yeah, it's a lot to memorize and learn, I guess. And I said at the beginning that you were there when the Women's National League started. Now we have the biggest stars in the world about to play in the biggest stadiums in Australia. And New Zealand, what impact do you think that this tournament will have?
Oh, you know what? I don't know if we'll realise the full impact until after the tournament. And I think we can speculate about it now and think, I've got no doubt we'll see increased playing numbers across boys and girls, which is really important. I think hoping the Matildas have a really good tournament and a deep run into the tournament, I think there'll be more resources and funding around women's football in our country and in New Zealand as well. I think in terms of legacy and impact, I think we've spoken a little bit about it, but commentators and having women in positions of voice and power, I think those kind of things are really, really important as well. So I think it's a whole raft of what the impact will be. And I don't think we'll quite feel the extent of it until sort of months after the tournament.
And I guess there's been countries like the US and also like England and just many other countries in Europe where I guess football is kind of like just the women are like treated normally like the men as well, and they're both getting paid and they're both getting, huge crowds because of like the Euros and whatever. Do you think that this World Cup is going to be that kind of changing point for Australia where, it's kind of our time?
I think so. I think that's exactly right. And I think we saw what the Euros did for England, winning the European Championships last year. And now you're exactly right. Like the WSL is attracting bigger crowds in England than they've ever seen on the back of that tournament. Some of the girls in that Lionesses squad are now household names. And I think there are definitely names in the Matildas squad that people know, but there's also some they don't know. And I think by the end of this tournament, not only the Matildas and the name of the Matildas will be known across Australia, but I think so many of the girls in the Matildas squad will be household names.
So excited for that. Thanks so much for the chat, Grace, and I can't wait to hear more of your amazing commentary, especially during the World Cup.
Thanks, Abby. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening. To support Her Way, visit the link in the description section.